Hownikan.
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 You're listening to Hownikan Podcast, highlighting citizen Potawatomi Nation issues, members, and more. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Hownikan Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Paige Willett. This episode discusses how to combat habitual stress from the pandemic, the history of the Oklahoma land runs, and how to teach a dog commands in Potawatomi. Approximately 6 months since the pandemic's onset in the United States, many people are experiencing exhaustion in this time of heightened tensions, including fears of uncertainty, added responsibilities, or adjusting to more time alone. The added anxiety can result in a lack of motivation or positivity. However, Citizen Potawatomi Nation Behavioral Health Department psychologist Shannon Beach finds thinking ahead helps replenish spirits.
I think a lot of people, when they look at it and say this is a temporary norm, that gives hope. Well, that's just the look toward the future. That kind of idea that we can keep trudging through this and eventually we'll come out on the other side. Yeah, I think if we all band together and wear our masks, then we'll get there just that much quicker.
Accomplishing day-to-day tasks has become difficult for many, not to mention tasks requiring long-term attention. The constant flood of information regarding the coronavirus can cause people to become overwhelmed, frustrated, and irritated, but Beach says those feelings are normal.
I think that a lot of this is pretty similar for a lot of people, and that we've done so much, and that it just kind of seems repetitive and old. It's definitely not. We definitely do need to take all of our precautions. Now just as much, if not more, as in the past, because I think as people get more accustomed to it, it's easier to become more lackadaisical.
Beach recommends keeping the big picture in mind to overcome those hurdles while adhering to guidelines from medical and civic leaders.
Working with Native people, I think there's a lot more community in general than typical Western culture. So, people do have that idea of we need to do things that are best for the community and do things that are best for everybody's safety. It's not just about me. So I think people are willing to do these things, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you can't get irritated or frustrated or stressed or things like that. So it certainly puts a lot more work on the individual. And that extra work always leads to stress.
In recent months, Beach has noticed a shift in anxiety focused first on the virus and sickness to its consequences now, such as quarantine, uncertainty, life management, and more. During a recent Hownikan interview, Beach said people mainly feel cooped up and long to return to life and one another. He suggests finding solace in shared experiences and recognizing unpleasant emotions as a logical outcome of the circumstances.
When we do that, when we do commiserate with each other about the problems that we've had, we can oftentimes find solutions, find ways to navigate these waters. We're not going to fix this today, but we can address where we are today and how we get to that next place.
While many lost jobs in the last few months, others began working harder than ever before. According to Beach, creating healthy limits feeds mental stability and self-care comes first.
We certainly need to have boundaries sometimes. We live in a country where it's kind of considered honorable to just work and work and work and not consider yourself.
Finding things to be grateful for, even small ones, is also a healthy habit. Beach puts this idea into action with his morning cup of coffee. It keeps him grounded, and the taste and smell provide a bright start to each day.
I'm thankful for it, and I can express that. And when I think about that, it can be helpful. Not just with coffee, though. I mean, we want to express gratitude to other people. That's definitely going to help boost mood whenever we really focus on that and focus what we're truly, truly thankful for.
While that sometimes seems impossible, it is important to remember new experiences resulting in tangible change often bring anxiety and require time for adjustments. Beach encourages everyone to remember the novelty of the situation.
We get to be who we are through practice, and we just don't have any practice with this. This kind of thing hasn't been present since, what, 1918. Which people don't have the practice to live in this kind of way so much. So there is a lot more stress because we're all kind of sailing uncharted waters.
And of course, Beach always recommends counseling. Citizen Potawatomi Nation Behavioral Health Services is available at 405 214 5101. Reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1 800 273 TALK. That's 1 800 273 8255. Or text CONNECT to 741 741. They're also reached online at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. In the late 1800s, the United States government hosted several land runs in present-day Oklahoma to settle what it deemed unassigned lands after dividing Native American treaty reservations into allotments and purchasing the supposed surplus. The government had forcibly relocated some tribes only decades earlier, including Citizen Potawatomi Nation members. September 22nd is the 129th anniversary of the land run of 1891. It opened much of what is now Potawatomi County to settlers, including lands of the Iowa, Shawnee, Sac and Fox, and Citizen Potawatomi tribes. CPN Cultural Heritage Center Director Dr. Kelly Mosteller sat down with Hownikan podcast to highlight the native history of the land runs of Oklahoma that often remains undiscussed.
It was absolutely something that was forced upon us after we had been subjected to the Dawes Act in 1887. It begins in 1887, but really the allotting of lands takes a while. There's many steps to the process. So once the land had been allotted and there was a good idea of how much quote unquote surplus land is going to be available, this is when we were approached by the government, and they informed us that the method by which they were going to make available these surplus lands was a land run. The land run as a process was not, supported by everyone. I think there were people on the other side of it who sort of foresaw some of the disasters that could happen by sort of having a free-for-all. So this was very much supported by your boomers like David Payne and others who, quite frankly, had been illegally moving onto and claiming native lands for a while, and this was just giving them a more legal method to do that. So we were informed earlier in 1891 that our reservation would be opened by land run, and what that meant for us was that any lands that had not been allotted was going to have this new classification of surplus lands. And they were also going to be surveyed and carved out into 160-acre plots for opening to non-natives who would come in under the Homestead Act. That was sort of the legal framework that they were going to use. And the Homestead Act basically said that if you move on to a plot of land and you take care of it and improve it over 5 years, at the end of that 5 years, the title is yours. So there was a precedent for this idea of people moving in and taking land without having to pay for it and eventually becoming the title holder to that land. So that was a precedent that was set. The concept of moving non-natives in and letting them sort of seize land and call it their own was an older one, but the method of the land run was something fairly new. It was as chaotic as one could imagine. Human nature comes into it. There's greed, land greed made people, the worst of human nature come out. So you had fights, you had people shooting each other, you had Sooners who were sneaking in and taking the plots of land, and cheating. And so really the land run process, while I think some argue that it was the most fair, ended up being quite disastrous on the ground and led to a lot of chaos and violence and discontent and arguing about whether it was done fairly. And of course, here's us, the Potawatomi, standing on the sidelines, just sort of unable to stop it from happening. We're just watching over half of our reservation disappear into non-native hands in one afternoon, and there's nothing we can do about it.
You use the term surplus land, which makes it sound like it was just sitting there and nobody else wanted it. And there were several tribes involved whose lands came to have that term.
Yes, surplus is very misleading, because if you want to take it all the way back, it wasn't surplus land when it was the range land of the Comanche and the Kiowa and the Caddo and the other communities who had been living on and around the central plains of Oklahoma for centuries. It wasn't surplus then. It certainly wasn't surplus whenever we were removed to Indian Territory and the citizen Potawatomi purchased the land on that reservation and were promised that it would be ours forever and always, and we legally purchased it. It was not surplus for the Potawatomi who were forced into allotment under the Dawes Act, and we did not have the option of keeping the lands that weren't allotted to living members at that moment for future generations. So we for sure did not think of it as surplus land. We may have understood that it was presently unsettled land, or that it was land that we in that moment weren't using in a way that our Indian agent or others who were moving in thought it should be used. It may not have been under cultivation. It may not have been fenced off. There may not have been a home on it, but that does not mean that we did not understand that this is ours by treaty and by purchase. And we very much thought of it as our land. It was outsiders who came in and put that legal status and that title upon it and cut us out of that process.
How has the land run continued to affect land today for tribes and for specifically CPN?
The land run is something that was both sudden and stark in that half the reservation disappeared in one afternoon, and it is something that has lingered and just continues to come back to haunt us. It sounds a little dramatic when I say it that way, but it really is, because now, decades and decades later, you've had lawsuits over land. You've had this question of tribal jurisdiction on our former reservation boundaries, where they may have taken the title to that land away from us, and it may be in the hands of individuals or maybe under the jurisdiction of, say, a municipality, but it still falls within our former reservation boundaries, so we still have some tribal jurisdiction to these lands. It has cost the tribe a great deal of money buying back our former reservation lands 1 acre at a time. The land run and the stripping of tribes of not only the control of those lands, but the questions around the jurisdictional boundaries has been ongoing for decades now. And, as someone I can say personally growing up in Oklahoma and having to sit through the way the land runs are taught in school, and being asked to wear my Indian clothes and show up and watch as my classmates run out on the playground and claim their plot of the playground in the land run reenactment, it just does such a disservice to the very real and very complicated histories around the land run for Native peoples who still live in Oklahoma.
Why do you think that's so important for people to know both sides of the history with something like the land run?
The curriculum that has been built up around the land run and the curriculum that has been built up around Thanksgiving are very similar in my mind. in that we have decided that students can only handle a very one-dimensional understanding of American history. You absolutely are leaving out the other side of that story of it wasn't an empty open wilderness. People have been living here for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And all of these narratives that we build up about conquest and about being pioneers and making it and striving in a new land was always being done at the expense of someone else's sovereignty on that land. So I think that there are people who are truly proud and excited of the uniqueness of Oklahoma's history and the way this land was settled. It really does speak to that pioneer narrative. And it highlights these things that these individuals think is what makes us quintessentially American. But I think when you try to do it without complicating that history and making it more three-dimensional and fleshing it out and putting in all of the complicated stories and all of the people who were on the other end of these pioneering efforts, you are doing a disservice, because we can love our country and we can be proud of our country only when we truly understand what happened in the United States and how our history played out.
What do you wish that people knew about the land run that you find again and again they just do not?
So many people, I think, only know about the land run that they saw in movies and they probably have seen photographs of, which was the 1889 land run of the quote unquote unassigned lands. Again, I will argue those may have been federally unassigned lands, but they were the homelands of tribes. So, they think of that land run as the one that helped to found Guthrie in Oklahoma City, and they really think it was just this one big grand event, and it was this open land. If you've ever seen the movie Far and Away, it's just acre upon acre of rolling hills and no one's there, and that really was not the reality for most of the land runs. The land runs were both lands where tribes were not assigned, and then they were like our situation. Some of them were absolutely, they weren't just running on acre after acre, mile after mile of open lands. They were having to checkerboard through these settlements of all of these tribal people who had been there for 20 plus years at that point. There are not a lot of truly uncomplicated, happy stories that come out of the land run.
For more information on the history of citizen Potawatomi Nation land and tribal sovereignty, visit PotawatomiHeritage.com. Speaking with and teaching a dog commands in Potawatomi, such as Gushkejnen for lay down, Goshnen for stop, and Bonjour for shake, offers a fun way to learn the language with simple phrases, especially for beginners.
Beyond Shoda. Chip the bin. Mama pee.
Higbee descendant Reagan Marcy began teaching her dog, Blue, Potawatomi commands at 9 or 10 months old. Marcy enjoys learning different languages and now works for the Citizen Potawatomi Nation Language Department as a language aide.
I started teaching her the commands before I started working here. So when I first got her, I would talk to her, like I'd call her like Pinojes, like my baby, and Ndonis, my daughter. I would always I'd be like, Dokam, like calm down, because she was just super high energy dog. She's a pit bull and boxer mix, we think. And so super high energy for sure.
She never taught Potawatomi to the other dogs she owned. However, she finds Blue very receptive to learning a new language along with her. Practicing with her dog allowed Marcy to use simple vocabulary with no judgment.
When I talk with people that do know the language, my confidence just goes, and I completely forget everything that I know. And so they're a good starting place, and they're gentle teachers for sure. They teach me a lot more than I teach them, that I will say, 110%.
Here are some basic words and phrases ideal for everyday use.
Number 1 is Godowikes. Godowikes. Good job. And it means like good job, you, technically. Number 2 is Bagaji Wisnowin. Bagaji Wisnowin. And that means a snack, or like what I use it for is for a treat. And so if I ask her, I'm like, Bagaji Wisnowin ne? Like, do you want a treat? Or treat question mark? Number 3 is Bonjour. Bonjour, which means shake hands. Shake hands. Number 4 is Ganech Ashtak. Ganech Ashtak. And that means, like, it literally means your next hand. Like, give me your other hand. Number 5 is Jeep Tabin. Jeep Tabin. And that means sit down. Number 6 is Beyond Shoulder. Beyond Shoulder. And that means come here. Beyond Shoulder. Number 7 is Gashkashnin. Gashkashnin. That means lay down. I have to use this with her sometimes. She gets really, really excited. So number 8 is Dolkum. Dolkum. And that means be peaceful or calm down. I use this one a lot. Number 9 is Gashnin. Gashnin. And that means stop. Number 10 is Cho. Aha, that's what I've got. Chimigwedge.
Marcy also gave some tips and tricks to teaching a dog commands in Potawatomi, most importantly, forming a special bond as a foundation for learning.
I just knew that no one else was going to know what I was saying, and no one else was going to know what I was commanding her, and that she would only listen to me, and she would like look to me for like the commands. And she's still a kid. She's only 14 in human years, so she's still really rambunctious, and I'm still teaching her every day.
Marcy stressed positive reinforcement using treats and attention as opposed to yelling or physical punishment.
A lot of the times, if you sharpen your tone and you let them know they're in trouble, and you like have them sit and lay down and stay, it's like, then they're like, oh no, what I do, because dogs don't want to do bad, they want to do good. So you can just like work with that.
Adding structure to periods of learning signals to dogs when it's time to focus and pay attention.
And what I've noticed is that a dog that is full of energy is not going to be receptive to learning that well. So you kind of have to work with them for a while.
She keeps treats in her pocket while she lets Blue run around on her family's acreage. After Blue tires herself out, Marcy works on simple commands with her, offering a treat for good behavior.
I first start with simple commands. So she's off running. I'll be like, Beyond Shoda, come here. And she'll hear me and she'll come to me, and I'll be like, Jeep the bin. And she knows that command.
Offering a visual cue to go with the vocabulary, such as a hand up for stop, and a specific tone with each command, aids the learning process. For the best chance at success, Marcy recommended patience and spending plenty of time with furry friends.
Honestly, I think there's been a bit of a stigma with dogs thinking like old dogs can't learn new tricks, I would say it couldn't be farther from the truth, as long as you have a good connection with your dog, if you are treating your dog properly, your dog is going to be receptive to learning. And sometimes it takes time.
However, most dogs quickly pick it up. Reminders about the importance of using the language in everyday life can quell any apprehensions about teaching them Potawatomi.
Just go for it. Your dogs understand tone. usually they're going to understand what you're asking them to do. They're pretty smart.
Find CPN Language Department resources at PotawatomiDictionary.com, cpn.news/language, and on YouTube at cpn.news/YouTube. For this month's Learning Language segment, Reagan now takes us around her family farm and shares some of the words and phrases she uses every day.
Alright, so after I get my coffee in the morning, I make sure that the animals get their wop and wisnoin, and then I start my day. On number 1, Gitagaw Gamuk, farm. Number 2 is Bageji Wisnoin Gishkea, Bageji Wisnoin Gishkea, and that means I grow a little bit of food. Number 3 is Nui Baba Momgo, I'll ride around horseback. Number 4 is Nui Babam Se Mki, I'll walk around my land. Number 5 is Wawan, that means eggs. Number 6 is Beedi, means chicken. Number 7 is Namosh, and that means dog. Number 8 is Mamakshi, and that means donkey. Number 9 is Naktosha, and that means horse.
For more information and opportunities with language, including self-paced classes, visit cpn.news/language. You can find an online dictionary at PotawatomiDictionary.com, as well as videos on YouTube. There are also Potawatomi courses on the language learning app, Memrise. Hownikan podcast is produced and brought to you by Citizen Potawatomi Nation's Public Information Department. Our director is Jennifer Bell. Don't forget to subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find what you listen to. We're also on Facebook at Citizen Potawatomi Nation and on Twitter at C_P_N. Visit us on the web and find digital editions of the tribal newspaper at potawatomi.org. That's POTAWATOMI.org. Until next time, I'm Paige Willett. Miigwech Nikanek, Bamamina. Thank you, friends. See you later.